Hey guys, it's Sam and this is my October wrap-up. I cannot believe that it was already November. It's basically almost Christmas in my head and I just really can't get over it. I'm a little stunned. Also what I can't get over is the fact that I read 1 novella, 2 audiobooks, and 14 books for a total of 17 books this month. I don't even know what to do with that information. I can't believe it. So let's just get going. The first 3 books I read this month I read during Ribset. I put my TBR and everything in the description if you want to check that out. So I already talked about these a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of skim over them. So the first book that I read was The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherine and Valente. This is a middle grade novel and I really enjoyed it. It took me a little bit of getting into. I have discovered with middle grade that it takes me a little getting into. The writing is always really fantastical with middle grade and just that nothing is explained to you. You just throw into a world and everything's fine and there's really no like world building in that kind of sense, and the world building is in the sense that like everything is fantastical and this is just how it is kind of thing. If that makes any sense, it probably doesn't. But that's how this was. It was like a mix between Oz and Wonderland with its own elements thrown in. That's what Fairyland was in this story. So, and I can't even really explain to you. It's just, it's really great. But there's a lot of fantastical things going on in here, and I gave it 4 stars. The second book that I read during Ribset was Blood Red Road by Moira Young. I've already done a review on this and I'll post that right here. This is a post-apocalyptic story about a girl named Saba who is a twin. Her brother gets abducted by this group of militiamen in this world and she goes after him. This is a really fun original story. A lot of crazy stuff happens in it. And the writing style, as I said before in my review, is very different and it takes a little bit of getting used to the way that things are. The language is spelled phonetically in here and there are no quotation marks around dialogue. So it takes a couple chapters to get into, but once you do, it is so fast paced. I read this in about a day. I love it. This is the first book in the Dustlands trilogy and I fully intend to pick up the other books. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The last book that I read during Ribset was Mystic City by Theo Lawrence. And I did not really enjoy this book. It fell a little short for me. It is a dystopian story about a girl who lives in New York City, and in this New York City there's been a bunch of natural disasters, and so all of the rich people live in the Aries, which is above sea level, and all the poor people live in the depths, which is below sea level, and the poor people and the oppressed people include mystics, so they can warp energy and things like that, which sounds really cool. Aside from that, this girl wakes up without a bunch of her memories and she is magically engaged to her family's, rival's family's son. So it's kind of like 2 mafia families, Romeo and Juliet, and a lot of things don't make sense and it's very weird and she's kind of getting her memories back and isn't really sure what's going on, etc. So there was really no world building and the technology in this is a little too weird, where there's some technology that's very advanced and some stuff like Twitter is still referenced, which I find completely unrealistic. The romance in this is completely unbelievable and just out of nowhere and doesn't really make sense. The characters don't really have a lot of continuity, so they don't really make sense throughout the story. They all act kind of differently at different points and it makes no sense whatsoever. And I found myself really not caring about any of it that was going on. This is the first book in each trilogy and I do not plan to continue this story. I gave this 2 stars. Around that time, I finished Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which I listened to on audiobook. I really enjoyed this story. It is very much a grown-up fairy tale, and Neil Gaiman narrates the audiobook, and if you have the chance, I've said this before, but if you have the chance to listen to a Neil Gaiman narrated audiobook of his, do it, because it's wonderful. That was my first Neil Gaiman book I ever experienced, and I loved it. He did such a wonderful job of just pulling you into the story. It is a fantasy fairy tale story for grown-ups, definitely. It's about this boy who is in love with this girl in this village, and his village is basically connected to Fairyland, and he doesn't really know that, but it is connected, and he sees a shooting star one night, and she says, if you track me down that shooting star, you can marry me, because she's a brat. And then he goes off and tries to track down the shooting star. And there is a movie based on this, but I hear the movie is very different than the book. I haven't seen the movie, but I know the movie is very well loved. It's very like, it's up there with like Princess Bride and that kind of thing. So this is definitely a story that if you enjoy those kinds of movies, Princess Bride and all those, you'll definitely enjoy this. I loved this story. It was so wonderful and just so fantastic. And his story building, if you have read any Neil Gaiman, is wonderful. So I gave that 5 stars. I then picked up The Young Elites by Marie Lu. I've already done a full review on this, which I will post right here, but I will do a quick summary really quick. This is a fantasy series, the first book in a fantasy series by Marie Lu, and it is about this world where there are people that have been affected by a blood fever, and those people are called Malfetos, and they are marked in some way, they are scarred, that kind of thing. And some of the people that are Malfetos also have superpowers, kind of. And that group of people is called the Young Elites. And our main character is being basically killed by the Inquisition when the Young Elites find her, rescue her, and she kind of has to join their party and that kind of thing. And there's lots of things going on with this, but basically I found the story a little bit lacking. There wasn't really enough world building for me. I didn't feel like there was a real fantasy setting put in place for me. I found the characters not as well developed as it could have been. I really did enjoy our main character, but I just think that there could have been more there, and there will be in future books. I understand this was the first book, but it's usually a complaint with the first books in a series for me, is that there's just not enough character building in the first book. I realize there's more books coming, but I need a little more, and I just didn't have that. And the romance in this is also very off-putting to me personally. There were a lot of things I did enjoy. It was very fast-paced, and I also enjoyed the different superpowers that were listed in here and kind of how they were explained and that kind of thing. And I do see potential for the rest of the series, so I will be continuing to pick them up. I'm just not sure if I will get them as soon as they come out. But I gave this 2.5 stars. I then picked up All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I've already done a review on this. I haven't posted it yet, but when it is posted, it'll be right here. I loved this story. This is an historical fiction set around World War II, and it follows two different narratives, one of a blind French girl and one of a Nazi German youth boy growing up. It takes place over a long period of time, and it kind of is one of those stories that jumps from present day this time to back and that kind of thing. But it's not jarring, it's not off-putting, it's so wonderful. This story just built up in such a beautiful way. The writing is phenomenal. I cared about all of the characters. All the characters in here are definitely the smaller players. You know, you're not seeing like Hitler and like any, you know, higher up German soldiers or anything like that. You're not seeing the heavy hitters. You're seeing the daily people and what they're going through and how everything built up and how everything stacked to kind of create this World War II. And it was beautiful. I'm going to save my flailing for the review because it is wonderful, but if you haven't picked this up yet and even that little bit sounded like it was enticing to you, give it a go. It is wonderful. 5 stars for sure. After that was the start of the Dewey's 24-hour readathon, which I participated in. I didn't do as well as I wanted to, but I still got some books read and I am happy with that. So the first book that I picked up was Rooftoppers by Katherine Rundell. This is a middle grade story and it's about this girl who is basically adopted. She was found in a shipwreck by one of the people that was also shipwrecked, and so he raises her, and so there's social services are coming in and out of their house and that kind of thing, and finally they're saying, we're going to take you away, but she believes that her mother is still alive and that she has a mother out there somewhere and she wants to go find her. So her and her adoptive father run off to Paris to find her mother, and there's this whole kind of society that lives on the rooftops in Paris, and it's kind of that whole story and that whole community and everything like that they kind of discover when they go on this quest to find her mother. So it is a very, very cute story. I really, really enjoyed it. It was very fast-paced, you know, it was cute, very short, and another, again, with middle grade, it's kind of more fantastical. There's not a lot of things explained. It was very, very cutesy, but I had some problems with some of the social work elements that were thrown in there, as the social workers is the bad guy. For those of you that don't know, I'm a social worker. I do adoptions. And so that was kind of off-putting. It probably wouldn't be off-putting to other people. It was off-putting to me because it's just one of those things where like you see the social worker as the villain all the time and it's just kind of like eye-rolling a little bit. But I also felt that the story ended in a way that things weren't really wrapped up. Sometimes I like those kind of vague endings, and sometimes I don't, and in this case I just felt like there could have been more there. It could have been just a few more chapters and kind of wrapping up some of the loose ends, so I don't feel like a lot of things were wrapped up. But for a middle grade story, this was very cute, very fast-paced, very much put me in the setting, and I really did enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars. I then picked up Of Triton by Anna Banks. This is the second book in the Serena Legacy trilogy. I really enjoy these books. These books are a lot of fun. I've talked about that before in my other wrap-ups for the first book. They make me feel really nostalgic for some reason. I don't know why. But I really enjoy the mermaid lore in here and how the mermaid's world is kind of built up. You get to see more of the mermaid kind of environments in this, which is really cool because the first book is mostly on our world, and this one has a lot of stuff to do with theirs, which is really awesome. And it's just wonderful. This book is very fast-paced, it was very short, and I felt like it was the perfect length. I didn't feel like anything was drawn out unnecessarily. All of the different drama things that come up in this didn't feel like they were just being drawn on to add length to the book. So it was very short, very concise, very fast-paced. All the characters that you enjoyed from the first book came back, and it was just wonderful. So if you like that series, or if you haven't picked it up yet and it sounds like something that you would really enjoy, I would definitely give it a go. I find these really, really fun, and I just cannot put them down. I gave this book 4 stars. I then picked up Ignite by Lily Paradis. This was sent to me by her publisher for review consideration. I'm actually going to be posting a review for this soon, so I will put that right here when it is posted. This is a contemporary story about a girl whose father has passed away, her mother has basically abandoned her, and she finds out on her 21st birthday that her stepmother has died and that she has left her 3 kids to her. Which, yes, is a huge shocker. That happens in the first, chapter of the book. So, it's her story of kind of figuring out if she can handle that responsibility. Also, there's this mysterious boy, he's the neighbor, and he kind of falls into her life, these kinds of things. I just didn't really enjoy it that much. It is definitely like a darker contemporary story, and it is written in a way that's very kind of episodic, so it feels very choppy, and a lot of big events happen in this fairly short book, and I just felt like it wasn't very realistic. But if you enjoy these kind of contemporary stories that are very dramatic and very kind of unrealistic, you know, like if you like Beverly Hills 90210 as a TV show, or like Seventh Heaven, or some of these more dramatic, unrealistic contemporary kind of stories, I think you'd really enjoy this. I was just really off-put by kind of how it was written and the romance in this, and I wasn't really connected to any of the characters. I will talk about that more in my review, but I gave this 2 stars. I then picked up the Why the Last Man bind-ups, volumes 1 and 2. This is a story by Brian K. Vaughn. He's the same guy that wrote Saga, and I've heard nothing but good things about these comics, so I wanted to get into it. It is about a guy, Yorick, and his pet monkey who live in a world where all of the men, anything with a Y chromosome, has died suddenly. That happens at the very beginning of the first one. And no one knows why. There's a lot of different things going on. It's very intricate. It's kind of, if you enjoyed Saga, if you've already read it, those multiple different storylines and how that works, it's very similar. I mean, it's not the same kind of story at all, but it's those kind of multiple things all factoring in. There's a lot going on. So I have given this series so far 4 stars. I read the first and second volume, like I said, and it still hasn't, I haven't quite gotten into some of it yet, but it's very funny, very fast-paced, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I then picked up Shatter Me by Taherah Mafi. This is the first book in the Shatter Me trilogy, and I've been hearing about this series since I first joined BookTube 2 years ago when I first started watching videos. I've heard nothing but good things. And then Whitney from Witty Novels, I'm sure all of you know about her, but I will link her down below, always talked about this series. This is her favorite series of all time, and I just kept putting it off. I've had this on my shelf for a while, I just kept putting it off, and I just thought that it was going to be overhyped and all this kind of thing, and then finally Izzy and I from Just Keep Reading, I will also link her channel down below, started to buddy read this together, and I finally got into it, and I'm so glad I started to just get into this series because I was putting it off for way too long. Basically, this is a story about a girl named Juliet. She is in an asylum when you first see her, and her touch basically kills people. She doesn't know why. She's the only person with these kinds of abilities, and she's just been trapped in an asylum for 264 days. And then, magically, this other prisoner gets put in her cell with her, and things kind of just escalate from there. I'm not really going to tell you what all happens, but people basically want to use her as a weapon. It lives in a dystopian world, it's very militarized, that kind of thing, and things just really take off from there. I really, really enjoyed the writing in the story. Taherah Mafi's writing is beautiful, and it's very, very unique and like nothing I've ever seen before, so I really, really enjoyed that. But I did have a lot of problems with this book. I felt that Juliet, again, was underdeveloped, and she just felt like I needed more from her, and I just didn't get that within this book, and I just, there was also a really bad case of insta-love in this story, and I was just skimming over a lot of it because I just couldn't handle it. I will preface this whole thing with saying that I've been hearing about this book, like I said, for years at this point. So while I'm not spoiled, I do know things about certain characters, and I've heard different things about who people like and who people don't. So I was a little biased going into there. Regardless, there was insta-love. I know that even if I would have not heard anything about this before, I would have given this book the same rating based on that alone. So that was stuff I skipped through, and I just felt like there wasn't enough in the story. It was just, there wasn't enough character development of any of the characters. There weren't that many characters besides the 3 main ones that you really get to see. I just felt like it was lacking a little bit. But again, this is the first book in the story, and I gave this 3 stars. Obviously, I liked this book enough to pick up the novella, which was Destroy Me. This is the novella between books 1 and book 2. Obviously, I read this on a Kindle that I borrowed from somebody because I had to read it. And this is the book centered around Warner, who is the villain in the first book. And I loved it. And for those of you that have read the series, it's so good. It explains a lot of things that you didn't know about Warner in the first book. Obviously, in my opinion, there wasn't enough Warner in the first book. I really love him as a character, as a villain, as anything. I just love him. So I really, really enjoyed that novella. Again, Taherah Mafi's writing is beautiful, and he's a character that you could just envision so perfectly. Sometimes I can't really understand people's facial expressions, like when I'm reading, there's just not enough there, but his mannerisms are described perfectly and his personality is described perfectly, and it was so good. If you haven't read the novellas for the Shatter Me series, what are you doing? They're amazing. So yes, 5 out of 5 stars to that novella for sure. I then finished Delirium by Lauren Oliver on audiobook. I've been listening to this for a few months. I was listening to it from the library, and then I had to go back, and then I got it back again, and I finally was able to finish it, which I'm so thrilled with. So it is a dystopian story about a world that has basically outlawed and made love into a disease, and they have a cure for love, and so love is like the most dangerous thing, and once they've gotten rid of love and people feeling love, they feel like the world is safe and that kind of thing. So it's a dystopian USA where love is basically criminalized. So it's a story about Lena, and she is really, really close to her cure date. You get cured when you're 18 years old. And different things start happening where she kind of starts to very much doubt this system, and then she meets this boy named Alex, and he kind of shows her different things about the world and how things aren't exactly how they seem, and everything kind of goes from there. So this is the first book in the Delirium trilogy. I know it's very popular. Most of you have probably read it by now. I have not. And I didn't have any really desire to read it, and I decided to pick up an audiobook. I'm really glad that I did. I really liked the narration. I liked it and I didn't like it. So I liked it because it was really, really vivid. There were times when I was brought to tears by the narrator in this book, but also I prefer when they have different voices for the 2 different genders, and the voice that this narrator, who was a female, used for the main love interest made me really not like him. It was just, I just didn't like it. It was just an annoying voice. She did beautifully on the rest of the voices, but he was just an annoying voice. So I'm not sure if I would have reacted better to the book with that piece kind of figured out, but it was a dystopian, which it's hit and miss with dystopians, and I just wasn't really sure on the romance. Like, I wasn't really feeling butterflies from the romance. It wasn't very believable in my opinion, but I really did like the friendships. I really liked the different family dynamic that was going on. The twists that happened in that book were completely taking me by surprise, like especially the ones towards the end were just, I never could even see those coming. And I really enjoyed Lena as a character because for once I feel like we have a dystopian where there isn't the character that knows everything is wrong and is trying to fix it, you know, from the first book kind of thing. She really believes that everything is okay within her world for a very, very long time, and I found that very believable. But like I said, the romance I just wasn't buying. That's a very major point of it. But I'm wondering if I would have liked it better if I would have read it. So I plan on continuing the series and reading the rest of the series in physical copy and seeing how I feel about it then. So I gave Delirium 3.5 stars. I then picked up Unravel Me by Taherah Mafi. This is the second book in the Shatter Me trilogy, and I really, really enjoyed this. The first half was a little slow for me. There were still problems that I had in the first book. The second half picked up so much to make the second half be like 5-star worthy. Obviously I'm not gonna tell you what happens. I'm not gonna spoil anybody on that, but it's so good, the second half. So if you guys have only read Shatter Me or only read part of Shatter Me and weren't really feeling it at all, that's kind of how I was feeling, push through and Unravel Me, because Unravel Me was so good. I stayed up so late trying to finish this, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I had to pick up the next book right after. This was definitely a 4.5 stars for me. So then, obviously, I picked up Ignite Me by Taherah Mafi. I read this in one sitting. So I read like 30 pages one day, and then I had to take a break because of work, and then the rest I read in one sitting. So I don't want to lie to you guys. I read it technically in 2 sittings, but really in one sitting. This book is so good, and I understand the hype behind the series. You have to get to Unravel Me in this book. If you've only read Shatter Me and you were just like, seriously, this is just so good. If you guys follow me on Twitter, I was flailing over this book, like all night. And I just want to thank Whitney of Witty Novels because I was freaking out on Twitter, like I said, and she came to my rescue. She's the real MVP. I love her because I needed somebody to talk about this with because nobody I know has read this series. Series is so good. I can't talk about it obviously, but it is wonderful. It was a perfect wrap up to the series. It didn't leave me wanting anything else. It was just, I mean, obviously I want more books, please, Taherah, more, please. But it was so good. So it's everything that you want, you know, the series built up and got progressively better the entire time and just hit its peak at the finale, which is what everybody wants. You know, you don't want the series to start out good and go downhill. You want it to be like this and just hit the high point at the finale book. So good. Go pick it up. It's good. It's worth it. You'll enjoy it, I promise. So I'm really proud of myself for finishing a whole series in a month, and I am going to do that more because it makes me feel good because now it's done. And I don't have to worry about it sitting on my shelf, the sequels like yelling at me from my shelf like they're done. And I can just look at it. Look at what I did this month. Look at that. It's wonderful. I feel so great about it. The last book that I picked up was The Ocean and Elaine by Neil Gaiman. Like I said, I listened to Stardust at the beginning of the month and really enjoyed it, and I wanted to pick this up. I started this during the Dewey's 24-hour readathon and just couldn't get into it. It's so super short. I don't know what was going on with me. I just couldn't get into it. Neil Gaiman, for those of you that don't know, which I'm sure most of you do, he has a very creepy, kind of eerie sense to a lot of his books, and I wasn't really feeling it. I'm not really a creepy story person. I just don't really like it that much, but this story, I'm not going to even tell you what it's about. You have to pretty much go in blind, but it still has the eerie atmosphere that Gaiman is so good at, and sometimes I'm just not feeling that. So I really did enjoy this, but I can't give it a rating yet because I really just don't know how I feel about it. I read it yesterday. I still can't really, I really can't put my finger on it, but this is definitely another one of those adult fairy tales. Very much magical realism. You don't really know what's true and what's not in this, and it is very, very beautifully crafted the way that Gaiman just does it masterfully, and I really am looking forward to reading more of his books. American Gods is sitting on my shelf, and I may pick it up soon. It's been staring at me for 2 years, so I may pick it up soon because I know I do like his writing, but this eerie atmosphere was really perfect for right before Halloween, but like I said, I just don't know where I sit yet. So if you follow my reviews on Goodreads, that will be up at some point when I do know how I feel about it. Alright guys, that is it for my wrap up for October. I can't believe I read this many books, but I am super proud of myself. So comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Have you read Shatter Me? Are you going to read Shatter Me now? Because you should. That's kind of my new thing now. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read 17 books again for a while because that was a lot, but I'm hoping I can keep up that in the teens number for a little bit and carry that on through the winter. I hope you guys all had a great reading month as well. Thank you all for watching, guys, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!